So welcome, our remarkable colleague, Sabreena. We so appreciate your solidarity and your consistent visionary leadership. And as always at Setsi, we begin all things by giving thanks to our creator, by giving thanks and acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Sabreena, could you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Victor. It's really good to be on this platform with you. My name is Sabreena Delhon. I'm the CEO of the Samara Center for Democracy. That's a non-partisan charity, and our aim is to make it easier for people to talk about and participate in politics. And we do that through research and public engagement initiatives that are aimed at measuring the health of our democracy and also bringing about a vibrant culture of civic engagement in Canada.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for your leadership and the remarkable work that your organization is doing for so long. So my next question, what's inspiring you right now? What has you curious, or what's keeping you up at night?
Well, this is a period of transformation around the world, and we're seeing a decline in democratic values as well right now, in particular around how digital technology has been affecting our societies, the harm that's been happening through those things. And in this dark period, though, I am finding inspiration in stories that we don't really hear very often. And they're stories that are a privilege for me to get to know and hear about because of my work. So that's, stories about women mobilizing to protect their reproductive rights. There are stories of young people using that technology that I just said was really tough and awful for us, but they're using it towards civic ends. They're using it for pro-democracy initiatives and actions. And also, at the Samara Center, we've had a longstanding project where we do exit interviews with former members of Parliament. And we've been running that study since 2008. And recently, we released two podcasts, one in French and one in English, that's based on some of the recent exit interviews that we've done. And I got to do the interviews for the English show, Humans of the House. And, it was really amazing to hear from people who are not in the job anymore, so they can really speak freely, and they definitely do really be so open and candid about their experience in politics. And I found those discussions really hopeful and inspiring because across the board, across the country, across parties, these were people who were sharing their experiences so that it could be better for the next person. They were really invested in improving life in Parliament, and they wanted to encourage other people to run as well. And, in doing these interviews, we had booked, a certain amount of time. These are busy people, they have things going on. The interviews always went over time because there was just so much to explore, and it just really flowed, and it wasn't uncommon for people to become emotional in the conversations as well. And I think there's just a lot of hope and significance there because we're looking at the human side of politics, and that's something that often gets obscured. So the kind of hope and inspiration for me is in the different kinds of stories that I get to hear in this role. And those interviews are an example of very close proximity in terms of hearing those stories. So Humans of the House is where you can hear that. And it's over 6 episodes, we outline the journey of what it's really like to be an MP. And, the way we handled those stories was weaving a dozen together. So you kind of hear all these different perspectives along the way. And at the end of it, our hope, and that seems to be how it's landing with the audience, is that the audience also feels hopeful and optimistic. But also it's not because we have been saccharine or kind of glossing over stuff. It's quite real. Conversations are are definitely authentic and get into some tough stuff, but the openness and humanity in those discussions, I think, is important and useful as we kind of work to navigate through this dark time for democracy.
Actually, I couldn't agree more. Thank you. And so well said in terms of just providing all that context and background. I really appreciate you. Very comprehensive. So my next question, what challenges and barriers do you face in your work? And what are some of the approaches you and your colleagues are taking to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
Well, I mean, you probably get this answer from everyone you talk to, but funding is the big challenge, right? So Canada's nonprofit sector is essential to our society, and the demand for our work has only increased. There's a new study out from Statistics Canada this week that talks about how 46% of nonprofit organizations have seen a big increase in demand for their services, products, outputs, but only 6% have seen a significant increase in the capacity to deliver in this area. So sustained and substantial funding is key to being able to produce responsive work and also make sure that it gets to the different audiences that it needs to. And it's also key to being a responsible employer as well. So how are we responding to this as a team? One area has been to be very strategic with our partnerships and understand that when we, put our voices together and do some community organizing with a business lens on this, it's not just about enhancing our impact, but it's also about being more efficient with our resources.
I couldn't agree more. And I saw the reports on StatsCan, and it's crazy to think that after COVID, the folks that are doing essential work in the nonprofit sector, clearly there's an increase in demand, but the fact that 6% increase in terms of resource, like it's such a wide gap. It's almost a chasm in terms of trying those numbers meet. So once again, I appreciate you highlighting that, because a lot of people may not read those reports. And I know the provincial budget just came out in Ontario. The federal budget's coming out, I think, April 16th. So once again, there is that funding need that's consistent across the nonprofit sector. But I'm happy that despite all that, we stay in a state of abundance in terms of a mindset, because your organization is tenacious and still doing some remarkable work despite the squeeze. And I think, unfortunately, the sector always goes through these periods of resilience where we have to still operate at full form, but with a lack of resources, which is very unfortunate. So once again, I applaud your leadership and your diligence.
I would say, just to add, Victor, is it's not to me just about being responsive to the incessant demand for resilience, because it's okay to not be resilient sometimes. And also the call to be resilient is often to those who have got plenty of resilience, who, accounted for, maybe they need a break. And I would kind of, I want us in the nonprofit sector to think about our own culture and our own knee-jerk response to endure. And I know it comes from a good place, because the nonprofit sector attracts people who are really passionate about the mission of these different organizations. But I think there needs to be a way where we balance that passion with being sensible and reasonable and practical, and somehow finding a way to evolve the culture of funding and support so that we have what we need to do what society needs us to do, and for that to just be funded properly. We're not talking about decadent and luxurious budgets. We're talking about just basics to do a good job in good order and with a good team. And I hope that there can be a turning of the page here, and a shift in our culture and the way we communicate what we need to do the work that we know is so valued by Canadians.
I couldn't agree more. And that's endure model, I think, is really harmful. Like you said, the folks that have to be resilient are usually disproportionately the same folks, and the same types of organizations. I recently saw Uncharitable, the documentary talking about the charitable sector, and even the fact that when you look at how workers within the sector are treated because of the scarcity model and mindset and that endure piece, I think there's so much that can be done in terms of advocacy, whether it be the public, philanthropic, or private sectors. But definitely there is a need for change, drastic, because I don't think the demands are going to decrease by any means, especially when we have crisis after crisis. It's just crisis among crisis within our sector, consistently trying to meet these needs.
It's ultimately inefficient. Like, even if you don't care about the budget or the impact financially, it's really inefficient to have people kind of starting from zero and working in panic mode all the time. It's not sustainable, and it just requires, it's just kind of like a penny wise, pound foolish approach, I think.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes I get excited about, when I think about the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund or the Foundations for Black Communities, or there's new models that are being developed that are trying to turn philanthropy on its head and finding ways to get more responsive core dollars to organizations. Because like you said before, it's inefficient when you do a cost benefit analysis of what it takes for orgs to get only project-based money the last 2 years, 24 months, or 12 months, or 3 years, and then have to start from scratch in terms of funding forecasting or the amount of administration or reporting that takes them away from the actual project or service. It's very costly and inefficient. So I agree with you more.
Yeah, and I think the shift amongst philanthropists and philanthropic organizations is tremendous. It's really exciting. I think it just points to the fact that this is a cultural change. The will is there, but we have to build this new culture of, how we relate to each other and get things done in, with this more effective model.
Ashe, indeed. Thank you. So my next question, do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work that you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers?
Yeah, for sure. So our work is largely organized around 3 themes: technology's influence on our democracy, the lived experience of politics, and youth civic engagement. And so we do research in connection to these 3 areas, and then we produce evidence and use that evidence to drive public engagement initiatives, reports, or other kinds of materials that are relevant to our audience, which is very diverse. It can consist of journalists, teachers, professors, policymakers, other civil society organizations, including researchers as well. And, there's no shortage of things that we can focus on, but we feel that these 3 broad areas keep us in the space of relevance and responsiveness, and just helps to, organize our efforts as well.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And once again, I've been a fan of your work for almost a decade. I got an award from your organization, like I said, I mentioned before, about 10 years ago.
Yeah,
I've been
amazing.
Yeah, so
yeah, as an everyday political citizen, that's wonderful.
Yeah, no, it was a blessing. It was a blessing, and definitely it was something that my children. Actually, funny enough, I still have the plaque. It's in my father's office in Toronto, and the picture has my 2 sons in my arms because they sent me the plaque, and my son's little boys at an Argos game. That was a picture that was sent in. So everyone else had a professional headshot. I was the only one that had like this picture with my 2 sons, and the boys were, I think, like 5 and 3 at the time. Now they're taller than me. So it's such a small world that,
That's really special.
Anyways, so it's that long ago.
So
my next question, what is your ultimate goal? What does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
So at the Samara Center, we really understand that a lot of people feel intimidated or bored when it comes to talking about politics. They also might feel pushed away. And what we really want to do is help people in Canada realize a sense of connection and ownership to their democracy and their institutions. And, ultimately, our goal is for Canadian society to have a sense of courage and ambition for how we practice politics in Canada. And to just have that vibrant culture of civic engagement and have that be a consistent priority across everything that we do.
Incredible. So what is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like to you and your colleagues?
Success would be that people feel at ease talking about politics, that it doesn't put them off, and that there doesn't, there isn't this sense of pressure that you have to be prepared in a certain way or defend your position or, have the sense of like, you really have to stick to a position. I would really like for that to just kind of dissolve and give way to thinking critically, having good information in our world, being able to work through complicated times and problems, having solid values ground the way we do that, and also understand that democracy is dynamic. It can evolve, and we don't have to be fixated on one golden age or another, which can vary depending on who you're talking to, that we can be focused on making this present moment really good, and we can also be healthy about how we approach our future. I think for a lot of people, there can be a sense that being democratically engaged or being a good citizen is about having a ladder and you're trying to work your way to the top. I just don't think that's reasonable with the way real life works. People need to understand that there are many different ways to be an active citizen beyond voting. There are multiple points of entry. That's one of the reasons why we have reports or events or a podcast. A lot of our material ends up in classrooms. We work with teachers to create learning resources out of them. It's never the wrong moment to, stop or start being civically engaged. You can always get back in. You can dial it up or down. Real life happens. That's okay. Just maintain your connection and then build on it as you can.
That's incredible. And I couldn't agree more in terms of the need for dialogue and deliberation. One of my brilliant colleagues, Amanouk, the executive director of Future of Good, we recently had a conversation. She mentioned something so remarkable. She was just like, Vic, what I'd love to see is for people to just go have a coffee or tea one of these days with someone that they completely disagree with, And I think when we look at the depolarization that's happening on the planets, there needs to be more of that. Like conversation you disagrry with. And I think I remember growing up in an era, and I think it's still very present, where the two things you don't talk about is religion or politics. In public. And I think that's not good. You know what I mean? And so like people should be able to have candid discussions and share their truths in a way that, especially in civil society, or what we call civil society, in a way where everyone is respected and leaves the conversation feeling whole.
Yeah. I mean, if you ask people, do you have political conversations? It just feels like an aggressive question. And of course, the answer is going to be no for most people, like people who aren't working in this space like you and I are, and people who are tuned into this. But if you ask people, do you ever talk about taxes? Do you ever talk about women's reproductive rights? Do you ever talk about public school, like what's going on in public school? Then the answer would be yes. And then it turns out that people actually are far more civically engaged than we realize. And then we can start to have some more nuanced conversations that make sense in people's real lives, as opposed to this box of it's a political conversation and I feel weird getting into that space. And when people don't vote, it's not because they're apathetic or don't care. The two main reasons people don't vote is because life got in the way or they didn't feel prepared. And so, our work is about exploring what's really going on with where people are at in terms of their democratic engagement, and then ensuring that the research questions that we're asking and the way in which our institutions are responding makes sense.
Ashe. So my final question, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
I think just to bear in mind that it can ebb and flow in terms of your civic engagement. There can be seasons in your life where you're reading everything and you're going to everything and you're listening to everything, and you just really have your finger on the pulse. And then there are going to be other stages in your life where you just can't maintain that level of engagement. And I don't think people should feel any shame about that, because you can build it back up again. And just to kind of just be okay with that because that's just real life. And this, high bar, nobody's doing that. And it's okay. And so it doesn't have to just be I'm civically engaged or not. We all want to be responsible citizens. I think, by and large in Canada, we should kind of take comfort that that is the, bare minimum. And that, just being a good neighbor, being active in your community, helping kids around you grow and become responsible citizens as well. It all counts and it all adds up.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for all the remarkable words, the sentiments, and the beautiful call to action. I so appreciate your remarkable leadership, your authenticity, and all the the endure resilience that it takes to lead an organization that's on the front lines doing some remarkable work. So once again, I appreciate you and all that you do for so many. And as always at Setsi, we close this conversation the way we began, by giving thanks to the original stewards, the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Sabreena. I so appreciate you.
Thanks, Victor.